Offense versus defense, the optimal risk management balance for financial institutions in today's world. The truly risk-enabled financial institution is one that is able to optimize its performance through more cohesive risk management practices. It is able to efficiently manage the defensive side of risk management, its compliance, regulation, infrastructure costs, while at the same time maximizing risk-adjusted performance on the offensive side. In the past, offense and defense could operate in isolation. Capital and liquidity were plentiful, revenues were king, and defense was strictly about regulatory compliance. Today, that no longer can be the case. The world has changed, margins have tightened, while compliance costs have skyrocketed. Offense and defense must operate in unison for banks to thrive in today's world. Prior to the global financial crisis, risk analytics were very narrow in their focus. A limited number of measures were required for regulatory compliance. The models underlying the measures were black boxes with opaque assumptions and calibrations, and the required data was highly structured and limited to the inputs that the measures required. When we imagined what the future of offense would be from the perspective of that time, we envisioned a world where all risks, market, credit, actuarial, would be tradable, and where we could take an active portfolio management approach in managing the bank. In effect, we envisioned a world where capital markets would become even more perfect and where we could easily re-engineer our balance sheet to any risk profile desired. The world did not unfold as it should. The global financial crisis exposed the mirage. Credit and liquidity effects became very apparent throughout the capital markets. Frictions no longer could be assumed away. All of this led to new modeling paradigms. We now valued simple products with complicated models, while previously we modeled complicated products with simple models. The markets ultimately were revealed to be much less perfect, leaving the business models of financial institutions in a state of transition. From the crisis. Well, similar to a GPS system in a car, we learned that you can't manage risk on the basis of a single tool or a single number. We really need much more information than that. We need a broader understanding of our total environment. If you don't look out the window when driving a car, bad things can happen, even with a GPS. Now, not that the GPS system isn't helpful or that any given risk measure, such as VAR, is necessarily bad, but it has to be used appropriately and for the purpose intended. And very importantly, we have to trust in the information that is provided to us. We also learn that no tool, no matter how sophisticated it might be, can be of any use if it is based on bad data. So how did regulators respond to the impact of the crisis? By asking banks for more metrics, liquidity and funding metrics, as well as capital metrics, stress measures, scenario analysis. They also asked for more transparency from the models, the ability to stress test embedded assumptions, and the calibrations within the models themselves. All of this, of course, requires even more input data from stress periods as well as current periods, but generally still very much structured data. To comply with all this new regulation and improve best practice, it doesn't come for free. If we measure the economic value added from an individual transaction in terms of its profits, less a series of costs and charges, it becomes very clear that with increased funding costs, higher capital requirements, and greater compliance investment, a much greater onus must be placed on managing both offense and defense. Banks have to be more effective on both sides. They have to be more effective on offense. Given the scarcity of capital and liquidity, it is now even more important than ever to make the right choices by getting access to the right information, importantly at the right time, using the right analytics before a transaction transpires. These increased costs of doing business have led to changes in business models, a shift towards more commoditized products with lower margins. This places an even greater burden on offense to drive better performance given the constraints at hand. In today's world, we need to know, often in real time, who is the best counterparty to transact with, what collateral should be posted, using analytics that are not additive and that need to consider a transaction's contribution to the firm as a whole. We need to manage scarce balance sheet resources much more efficiently. At the same time, banks also have to become much more effective on the defensive side. Now, given the business they are in, some costs, such as regulatory compliance, are outside their control. But other costs, principally their infrastructure, they can control. Therefore, infrastructure must become more nimble. The input data, the models, the analytics should be more reusable across the firm, instead of constantly recreating everything from scratch for every desk or business need that arises. And today, we have much greater ability to adopt innovative technologies and leverage the cloud for efficiency. The concept of a risk utility is one way for a firm to more effectively leverage its investment in risk technology, to mutualize its processes where appropriate, and to avoid duplicating efforts in multiple places, to leverage common data structures and models, to load once and use multiple times, to benefit from trusted, audited analytics that can be repurposed nimbly for new and bespoke requirements, to be enabled through the cloud and hybrid deployment models that can radically reduce the cost of infrastructure adoption. Furthermore, as raw data is transformed into a series of processes into analytics, the risk utility can also be viewed as a data refinery, spinning off more refined products at sequential stages of the overall risk value chain. Today we're at the cusp of a new era of risk management, one that is less mechanical in nature and much more insightful and forward-looking, leveraging all the recent advantages in data science. There is a lot more data at our disposal than the structured data we have traditionally used for risk analysis. There is unstructured data as well as structured data, information from publications, news alerts, blogs, other forms of social media. All of this can provide greater insight in terms of relevant scenarios, black swans that may not yet be reflected in capital markets prices. Harnessing this data not only can enhance our views of the future, but it can also train the analytics themselves so that through machine learning and related techniques, the parameters underlying our models can adapt exactly when the market conditions change, not well after the fact. All of this will produce more and more output data for us. But why not? The problem was never really about having too much data. The challenge is about putting some order to the data, combining it with other information sources to give us relevant insights, to help us discover the scenarios that could hurt us well before we have thought of them ourselves, for the machine to direct us as opposed to us directing the machine. Data science techniques, including artificial intelligence and machine learning across the risk value chain, will greatly transform risk management in the future. To take advantage of the promise of a new era, we have to start by breaking down the existing silos. Silos that prevent offense and defense from working in unison, or that artificially separate internal functions and risk classes. Financial institutions need a truly integrated infrastructure in order to get the best out of both the offensive and defensive sides of risk management.